The night was cold, the city shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to swallow every street and every building. I was standing at the train station, looking at the empty tracks. The clock on the wall showed that there were only a few minutes left before the last departure of the day. The train I was waiting for was the last one. I always took the last train, not because it was the most convenient, but because I felt more comfortable in its solitude. I am the kind of person who prefers silence, the kind who never talks too much, who hides in the corners, who observes. And that night, like so many others, the only sound filling the emptiness of the station was the low buzzing of the fluorescent lights. There was no one else there but me. Or at least, I thought there wasn't. When the train finally arrived, something felt off. At first, I thought it was just the fog creating a strange sensation, but there was something more. The train didn't make the usual deceleration sound. There was no familiar screech of the wheels on the track, not even the tremor I was used to feeling in my legs when it stopped. The door opened, but I saw no one inside. The corridor was dark, as if someone had turned off the lights. I hesitated for a moment. Normally, most passengers would have already boarded the last train, but not that night. That night, I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Something pulled me in, an invisible force, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me step inside. A simple, almost automatic decision that, looking back now, I feel was not truly mine, as if I had been dragged inside without realizing it. The train started moving without making a single sound. There was no acceleration, just the feeling that something in the air was about to happen. I looked out the window, and the station lights began to disappear, swallowed by the darkness of the night. The city streets became blurs of shadows, as if the city itself was dissolving as the train moved forward. I should have felt calm. It was just another trip home, but something was wrong. The train was too silent. I leaned back in my seat, trying to shake off the feeling of discomfort, but something was deeply unsettling me. I looked down the corridor. It was too dark to see the end of it, but I could feel that something was there. The air was dense and a feeling of foreboding wrapped around me, as if the train itself was alive, breathing, waiting. That was when I heard it. A step. I knew I was alone. There had been no one else on the platform, no one on the train. But still, the sound was there. A step, dragging, as if something was slowly moving toward me. My heart raced. I looked down the corridor, trying to find some logical explanation. Nothing, just darkness. But the feeling of being watched, of no longer being alone, was undeniable. The step came again, a low hissing sound, closer now. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It must have been my imagination, or maybe a passenger on their way to the bathroom, but no, I knew something was wrong. And then the sound stopped. Silence again. But this silence was different. It was deep. A silence that made me feel as if I were in a place where time did not exist, where reality was beginning to crumble. That was when the train lights flickered, a momentary failure. For a second, everything went dark. And then the lights came back, but it was not the same train. The environment around me seemed altered. The walls, which had once been polished white metal, were now dirty and rusted. The seat I was sitting on looked worn, faded, as if the train was far older than I remembered. And at the end of the corridor I saw a shadow, small at first but growing. It was as if someone was approaching, but I couldn't make out any form. And then I heard the voice, low, almost inaudible, but as clear as the hum of the lamps.
"You shouldn't be here."
My heart pounded. Something was very, very wrong. But before I could react, the train braked abruptly, throwing me forward. The door in front of me opened, not to the usual station, but to an even denser darkness. And before I could think about leaving or screaming, a figure appeared. A tall figure wrapped in thick mist with glowing eyes fixed on me. It was as if reality was unraveling around me. And I was about to discover what happens on the last train. I didn't know what to do. The train had started moving again, but not in the same way. The speed was slower, almost as if it were sliding through the air, dragging itself along the track without direction or purpose. The sensation of movement was almost non-existent, and yet I knew I was going somewhere, a place I couldn't understand. The figure, that distorted shadow that had moved away from me, left something behind like an echo in the atmosphere. And it wasn't just the sound that was disappearing, it was the feeling that the train had been invaded by something that was no longer of this world. I tried to look through the windows, hoping to see some clue, some glimpse of the outside, something familiar to anchor me to reality. But the thick fog outside wouldn't let me see anything beyond a grey and opaque curtain, an indistinct mass that seemed to swallow even the city lights. The city I knew, the places I used to walk, all had vanished. Where were the streets? Where were the buildings? Everything had been consumed by this darkness. Then, beside me, something moved. I blinked, trying to focus. On the seat next to me, where before there had been only emptiness, there was now a figure, not exactly a person, but rather a stain of shadow that seemed to radiate heat, as if the very fabric of the seat was transforming into something solid and dense. My body tensed in panic, but still I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. The presence was palpable, as if it were sucking all the air around me. It was as if the space was compressing, the environment closing in on me. I could feel the pressure increasing, as if something was pulling me into that shadow. The figure had no defined shape. As I looked at it, it seemed to distort, becoming more and more an abstraction impossible to understand. But for a moment I saw it clearly, a face, but not a human face. It was something without eyes, without a mouth, a pale and formless shape, as if it were a mask in constant mutation, without features I could describe. Just a featureless face, watching with a terrifying stillness. I felt my breath fail, a crushing weight pressed on my chest, and a strange sensation of being watched overtook me. More and more I had the impression that the entire train was compressing around me, and the only thing left of reality was that presence. I wanted to scream, but my words wouldn't come out. Everything was paralyzed, except for that entity, which seemed to grow beside me. That was when the figure finally spoke. Its voice was not an ordinary voice. It was not human, not even close. It was a mix of whispers that sounded like multiple voices overlapping, dragging through the air, cutting through the silence in an icy way.
You came in, but you can't leave.
The words sounded like a sentence, a condemnation imposed by something beyond my understanding. I tried to grasp it, but the idea of being trapped, of having no way to escape, consumed me. What did it mean? The train, the station. I was not going home, that was clear now. I was not going anywhere familiar. And that being, that thing that was beside me, that presence that didn't move but was there watching, what did it want from me? I tried to stand up. Something in my instinct screamed for me to leave, to run, but my legs were like lead, stuck to the seat. I looked at the door as if the mere sight of it was the key to my salvation. Maybe if I could reach the exit, I could escape this nightmare. But the doors didn't open. I reached them, desperate, and pulled the lever to try to force them open, but nothing happened. They wouldn't move. They were sealed, immutable. The train seemed to have completely stopped, yet at the same time, it kept moving. As if it were in a space that didn't conform to the rules of time and reality I knew. I was no longer in the world I knew. The voice whispered again, and this time, its words came with a deeper, more penetrating tone.
Time does not exist here, and there is no more you.
At that moment, the feeling that reality around me was unraveling became uncontrollable. Whatever this place was, the train, the presence, it was corroding my perception. I didn't know where the train ended and where my own mind began. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what was happening, how this was happening, and what was happening to me. What did this thing want from me? But before I could form another thought, the train lurched. Something moved in the shadows, that dragging sound I had heard before. Now it was closer, more urgent, as if the presence that had been beside me had multiplied, spreading throughout the train. And then a shadow rose before me, and a figure appeared, emerging from nowhere right in the center of the carriage. It looked at me, and panic took over my entire being, because it was my own image. It was me, but it wasn't me. The version of me standing before me had empty eyes, soulless, an expression that didn't make sense, as if it were a shadow of my own identity. It raised its hand, pointing directly at me, and the only thing I could hear was a whisper in my ear, almost imperceptible, but clear.
You will be next.
I was trapped. There was no way out anymore. The train, the darkness, the figure, everything was in a spiral that wouldn't stop turning. And in the midst of that darkness, I finally understood. I was no longer going home. I was going to the end.